just switching a little bit of context here, and as you relate, obviously a lot of the sales organizations around the world, especially the larger ones, have started to wrap their arms around sales enablement. In other words, what are all the enabling leadership practices that we need to put into a sales operations organization and to really make a difference? So that broader strategic view, not just the training, the communication, but the tools, the velocity of tools, the mix. It's many ways, I think, almost like an orchestra leader, starting to bring that jazz band into a more cohesive beat, different than traditional sales ops leaders that have mainly come in as, from the field, only, but are bringing a more strategic view to the operational pulse. So, what are you seeing that role of sales enablement leaders and sales ops, and do you see them making a difference? What kind of pulse are you seeing or in your client portfolio?
Yeah, so this is a great question. This is where I have a lot of passion and energy right now, because I have seen companies dramatically transform their sales organizations, revenue, and tactical sales results, if we want to call it that, with excellent sales enablement and sales operations. And so I tried to kind of summarize this for everyone, just with a high-level model, which is balancing. So at a high level, I find that the best sales enablement leaders are working on creating this balance between the sales velocity, which we talked about, and being customer-centric or customer-focused at the other end of the spectrum. So what I mean by that is we're balancing this net new, driving revenue over and over and over again, getting new sales, with hanging on to customers and account management and engaging with their customers so that they can grow their businesses, right? And it is a fine balance, because if you end up the sales teams that over-rotate on the sales velocity and just focus at revenue at all costs, I mean, let's face it, they end up like Wells Fargo, right? I mean, you end up creating bad behaviors on your sales team because you're too focused on the short-term revenue cycles. And companies that have been over-focused on that account management piece or that customer centricity piece end up bankrupt because they're not bringing on net new business. I mean, those are the extremes. So I found that the very best sales enablement leaders and sales operations leaders are bridging that balance and using data and using tools to help train people in this, maybe to use old-fashioned language, balance between a hunter and a farmer role.
Yeah, I guess one of the things that I've observed, just building on what you're saying, is, maybe one of the areas that we need to strengthen is looking through, all the KPIs that we have. If you think about your construct of a balance, and say which of those levers that are true KPIs that we're measuring, are they transactional in nature or are they customer-centric, strategic? And then also look at the ratio of budget, because there's no question from account selling or the sales strategies, the sales reps, the account executives are all trying to be as customer-centric as possible. But when you get into the formalized metrics and the budgeting allocations, we probably have an imbalance. So it's interesting to hear is that the best leaders that you've seen in sales enablement, they've got their pulse on their both. I guess my thesis is let's make sure they've got the pulse on some of the budget investments that are really needed to keep that balance. Because it's so easy as a sales leader, a CRO, EVP of sales to drive, the narrower perspective, but I always like to see the evidence in the the balance sheet in terms of where those triggers are. But that's a really good analogy. Thank you for sharing.
Well,
sorry.
You're right. No, I just was going to say you're right, and I think it's not just the budget; it's also the return on investment. So that one of the sales enablement teams that I'm working with, that I think is probably the most sophisticated in my client base, they do look at the return on investment that they're getting from these programs. So if they're, they know that they spent $2 million on a rollout last year of some sales methodology training. And so what are they doing? They built into Salesforce some triggers that have to be, or some checkboxes that have to be checked to say that, the salesperson did certain things associated with this methodology. So now they can say, okay, in our pipeline, the deals that had this methodology are 5 times greater. Or, for example, I know through this tracking, they now say, here's the deals that didn't use the methodology, here's the deals that did, and our closing percentage is 47% on the ones that did and 38% on the ones that didn't. And that's the critical piece that I think sales operations needs to play, and then they can feed into sales enablement, which should be aligned to say, here's where we're seeing success and here's where we should be investing.
Yeah, when you get into, a lot of the devil's in the detail, as we know, and being able to know when content's actually opened and really, really used, right? Because it's easy to do a tick box. The evidence is, when you've got the content in a technical system, and I know the duration of the time that I spent, going through that, and then to your point, correlating, it'd be interesting to dive deeper into how do you know, right? You know what I mean? But it's, that's the computing scientist or data scientist coming out in my bones, right? But I see the point about connecting the dots for sure. So we're going to move along, and we have, I'm doing this particular question, both Colleen and I are going to play out together, but one of the questions that we thought would be helpful is just to talk about how AI can augment sales operations and sales enablement practices. So I'm going to start that off, and then Colleen will talk about in terms of where she sees her clients going in this area and what has she observed to date in this area. So first, I don't think anybody here on the call would dispute that we're starting to see an area in sales around guided AI selling. And much of that's driven from the fact that most of the tools in sales, we've been looking in the rear view mirror, mainly using BI tools, like what has happened in the past, how are we trending? How are we trending this quarter versus last year? So really very much looking at data and making it interpretive, but always going backwards in the rear view mirror. I think the reality is that we no longer can rely on those BI methods. They actually drive maybe an 85% ROI typically. We're now into a world that, if sales organizations don't have advanced analytics, both predictive, which basically enables you to see forward thinking, obviously you extrapolate on insights, but it's always thinking ahead of what could be and what likely might be based on the moves that we make. So that's an area where AI comes into play, and then obviously the prescriptive analytics market is the interpretation layer based on what the science believes will happen, then what are the reasons behind that. So this market's exploding, significantly. I'm not processing all the elements on the slide. You probably have read them by now, and they'll come back in when we're online with the final materials. But I think, if your data in your organization is at a stage where it's highly disciplined and it's more complete, you're probably ready, if you have over 2,000 opportunities, to start thinking about, could AI give you a guiding system or a new traffic light in terms of what's good and what's bad to follow. So at a very basic level, we're not going to spend much time because the objective here isn't to talk about what AI is at length, but a very simple definition for you. It's simply there to try and mimic human intelligence. It's not something that's new. AI has been around since 1954. It's only really becoming mainstream because the processing power, but also because we've got so much data. We've got data that we can do more sense making, try and drive more understanding, and obviously act upon that. And the most important feedback loop is our ability to learn from that. There's a whole discipline and a body and around this. We've got a lot of material in our predictive world that explains AI in more detail. We're actually also building out a program with Forbes Business School that you'll hear more about as we go through the year. So, I think it's an exciting period to be a sales professional, to understand that this is another evolution in sales, moving a little bit more balance from just relationship, customer-centric selling to the science of selling. and the value that that can play in predicting future outcomes. This slide here is just a very simple construct in terms of the evolution between the basic descriptive analytics, which are more the BI, and how the evolution of these different modalities are playing out. I've already mentioned predictive analytics, which is based on a lot of regression, a lot of statistics in terms of the AI calculations, and that's forward thinking. Areas like predictive forecasting or opportunity scoring based on AI, or lead scoring would be another key area. Another one might be in terms of the competitive plays within the market and which particular competitor is going to be, more likely at odds of high growth, market share growth. It could be in the mix that you have within your products if you're a B2C, where you've got an engine that's basically giving you insights as to which product mix would best serve that customer buyer profile. So that's kind of on the predictive side of things. The prescriptive is the next evolution. Not all sales organizations are ready for this. We have a platform that brings predictive and prescriptive together, and also is moving in the cognitive side as well. But in the prescriptives, you start getting into where the decision making can be guiding the human to play the right playbook, so to speak. That science needs a lot of careful rigor to ensure that the pathways that are being communicated to humans are, really deep. They are based on a lot of depth, and they're also validated, by the best operators in the business, that those are the playbooks that you really do want in terms of the strategic growth and maybe direction of the company. Because if they're misaligned, you could be, recommending certain activities that don't align to your vertical growth strategy, or maybe even, the revenue mix that you want to achieve. The cognitive side starts going into feedback loops in terms of the human results, kind of like the model you were talking about, Colleen, but maybe a little bit more extrapolated, in the sense of based on the win rights and also the point of leveraging other agents for enablement, then how they can come together to increase the cognitive skills, really of the human performance. And obviously there's different diverse signals that AI can pick up, and as AI continues to move ahead in organizations, it will pick up multiple, pretty well as in time, it will pick up all signals, any direction, any channel, any content, any text message. It's moving into an area called robotic process automation, which is informing the algorithms. Obviously, if I added another layer, we would then probably move into the stratosphere, where that we're being able to execute increasingly a number of those activities, through AI agents, and we're seeing some of that now, but we'll continue to see more of it. Obviously, in terms of the market, it's important to be aware that this is another transformational aspect of evolving our sales professions, and AI will very much be part of our continued growth in our futures in the field of advanced analytics. So a lot to take in. Colleen, I know that you and I in the planning process, obviously you want to talk about Amazon, and I think it's a fabulous example in terms of AI enablement. And I'm going to just turn it over to you to talk about this, in addition, because clearly, they've got this dance card down cold, and they have had a vision on data and the importance of data for so long. It's actually even being discussed in the privacy and some of the data risks of how much do they know too much about us.
Yeah, absolutely. Between Amazon and Garmin, I think you pretty much could find out anything about me you wanted to, or maybe MyFitnessPal too, online. But here's what I say to my customers, especially those who are in more legacy businesses or traditional businesses, which is a space I'm working a lot, is regardless of whether Amazon is going to ever compete with you in your marketplace, they are affecting the way you need to sell in the future because of what they're doing with data. And so we call this the Amazonification. Yes, it starts at a consumer level, but it's driving business buying decisions to be made differently because this is now what people are used to and what they love in the sales process. So this is the balance here is this customer centricity and sales velocity that B2B companies need to look at. We need to take the data that, our version of the data that Amazon is using, to be really simple, it's as simple as, well, if Amazon can track my package for me, why can't you, right? It's those kinds of things. If Amazon can make recommendations, why can't you? And so we want to balance that customer centricity with still a very proactive sales approach where salespeople are actually out there creating need, providing insights, and delivering value the way we would manage it. Let's just call it a traditional business-to-business buying cycle or sales cycle. And those companies that are finding this balance are those that are succeeding. So, a couple of examples of what we're seeing, and this is often driven by Amazon or companies like them. So, retail companies have always used data very well, recently have used data really well to re-encourage people to buy from them or to save customers. It's the email, we haven't seen you in a long time, right? Because they know that if people go so many days or weeks or months without buying from them, they're lost forever. So business-to-business companies now can start using that in a predictive way to say, hey, don't wait to a seller, don't wait until your customer puts up their hand and says they're leaving. Here are the indications in our CRM that they're likely a flight risk. And so let's create intelligent account management programs, engagement programs that will either prevent that from happening or stop it from happening, starting altogether, right? So that's a simple example. We call that, building an early warning index or early warning system that says we can now start to predict when our clients are leaving, so that business-to-business salespeople can utilize that same program of, hey, we haven't heard from you in a while. On the upsell and cross-sell opportunities, I'm seeing clients use tools, again, we're talking about this sort of Amazon effect here, use tools to show what the best customers they have. Here's our most profitable customers. Here's the journey they took with us. Here's the products they bought, the order they bought them in, the packages, the consulting, whatever it is that we sell. And then they can lead the seller smartly through that cycle. This is where we get more prescriptive using data to say, here's the route your customer needs to take in order for them to be a top customer for us. So those kinds of things, in my world, of course, AI is always exciting, and new shiny things are easily create easy distractions for smart sales teams and sales enablement teams, but it always has to be tied down to our profitability. Are we getting more customers faster? Are they more profitable? Are we hanging on to more customers? And when we can measure that with these real life success stories, then we have huge wins.
Yeah, it's interesting. We were just talking about this earlier in a training session with one of our accounts, in the sense of the buyer and the customer journey. And you really can do a lot with data and the visualizations. It's really a lot of it's the imagineering that comes into play. In terms of being able to get that level of clarity, sort of that balancing thing. I've got all these visuals going off in my software mind right now.
Yeah.
Very powerful.